Words are bridges.
शब्द सेतु हैं।
अल्फाज दिलों को और इंसानियत को जोड़ने का एक अजीम और तरीन पुल है।
വാക്കുകൾ പാലങ്ങളാണ്.
शब्द ही पुल है.
ഗുംസിരദലോ
शब्दों सेतु छे.
लफ्ज़ च सरी कदलदारान वही न थोन
आखर हमार मेल सन आखर हमार जोड़
तीन किपिनपुर जिंकिंग
শব্দই সমন্বয়ৰ হেতু
কথাই হলো সেতু
কথাই রক ইয়াখারাইছে
পুত্রা সাংকো আসা
Thuhi inkung kainasiam tu ani.
வார்த்தைகள் பாலங்கள் போன்றவை.
Ajrahana apati kisale.
शब्दही माध्यम
Grauthaining yaukrai.
नंगड़ तकिल सेतुए कटोना
शब्द सेतु होन.
शब्दां दी सांझ.
Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Swati Daftwar and it's a great pleasure to bring to you a brand new series and initiative by the Jaipur Literature Festival in partnership with HarperCollins India. The series is called Words Are Bridges. Through Words Are Bridges, we hope to celebrate first and foremost the magic of language and the way language has allowed us to connect with each other. The way it's allowed us to share ideas and thoughts across countries and across borders. The way it's allowed us to build a large body of literature that we so love and cherish, no matter where we are in the world. And when we talk about languages connecting with each other, we inevitably talk about the power of translation and literature and translations. This is what Words Are Bridges hopes to celebrate, language in translation. In this series, we will be talking to eminent writers and speakers writing across Indian languages. But before we begin, I would like to invite Namita Gokhale, co-director of the Jaipur Literature Festival, Sanjoy K. Roy, producer of the Jaipur Literature Festival, and my colleague, publisher Udyan Mitra from HarperCollins India, to welcome all of you to this series.
Dear lovers of books and literature, words travel, ideas travel, stories travel. We welcome you to our new digital platform, Words Are Bridges. This important initiative looks at the act of translation as a mediation between languages and culture, between time and place. India's unique literary landscape, with its rich diversity and its absolutely staggering multilinguality, will be explored through a fascinating series of sessions that bring together writers, translators, and commentators. We at JLF are delighted to partner with HarperCollins India to expand our horizons of reading as we listen in to the original text and also examine its resonance through translations. Thank you.
Stories provide us place, context, culture and tradition. In India, with our vast diversity of linguistic traditions, we often don't have access to each other's content. The Jaipur Literature Festival brings to you Words Are Bridges to explore translation and writing from across India in association with HarperCollins.
At HarperCollins, we've always watched with delight as words build bridges, as the books that we publish introduce readers to worlds often unknown to them. This is especially true of our translations, which wonderfully connect cultures through the written word. Today, unfortunately, readers and writers are feeling more isolated than ever before. JLF's Words Are Bridges is a lovely initiative to connect us all over again. We at HarperCollins are really excited to be part of this program.
Our first session today is Translating Joy, presenting Joy Goswami's life and work. Shampuna Chatterjee will be in conversation with Ranjit Hoskote. Joy Goswami is one of the most powerful poets of Bengal and among the best in the post-Jibanananda Das era of Bengali poetry. Now, in this session, Shampuna Chatterjee, his translator, poet and fiction writer, will be in conversation with Ranjit Hoskote, art critic, cultural theorist and poet. Ladies and gentlemen, Translating Joy.
the sea or the ancient python circumscribing the earth it sleeps. In the cavity of its open mouth, darkness, the ocean roar. This is the path all living beings enter unwittingly. On the verge of that forest, you sit with your back against a tree trunk at the moment of death. Your eyes rest on the glittering eyes of the python. At last you see it is blind. Its eyes pebbles, shining only in the light of the moon. You see that roaring current is really a tongueless moat. You see the pit of its mouth is limitless, black, in which a few stars float.
সমুদ্র না প্রাচীন ময়াল পৃথিবী বেষ্টন করে শুয়ে আছে তার খোলা মুখের বিবরে অন্ধকার জলের গর্জন ওই পথে সমস্ত প্রাণী জগৎ নিজের অজান্তে গিয়ে ঢোকে তুমি ওই বনের সীমায় গাছে পিঠ রেখে বসে প্রাণ ত্যাগ করার মুহূর্তে চোখ স্থির করছো সেই ময়ালের জলজলে চোখে এতদিন পর দেখছো সে আসলে অন্ধ চোখ দুটো নুড়ির শুধু জ্যোৎস্না লেগে ঝকমক করে দেখছো যে স্রোতের ওই গর্জন আসলে এক জিভ কাটা স্বর দেখছো তার মুখের গহ্বর সীমাহীন কালো কিন্তু দুটো একটা তারা ভেসে আছে
থ্যাংক ইউ জয়দা আপনার কবিতা এভাবে পড়ে শুনে খুব ভাল লাগলো আর এই I suppose this is a good time for us to segue into the second part of the program, which is where I invite my friend Ranjit Hoskote, who's a very close reader of poetry in translation, also a translator himself, very deeply aware of Joyda's poetry, from having read, of course, selected poems, but also you're going to write the forward for the new translation of Joyda's prose poems that is forthcoming. So thank you, Ranjit, for being in conversation.
Thank you so much, Sampurna. And Joyda, it's really a great honor to be in this conversation with you and Sampurna because I have to embarrass you by saying this. You are truly one of the most extraordinary poets we have in India. Across languages.
Thank you very much, Ranjit. I'm a great admirer of your poems also. I have with me from 2004.
That is marvelous. But over the years, having read you in translation, having followed your work in Sampurna's translation, of course, there is just this immense experience as a reader of entering your world. And Sampurna, in the introduction to selected poems, has this to say, and I'm going to quote. She says, I sometimes think of Joyda as a traveler on a space odyssey of his own, his poems as time machines. Sampurna, I'd like to draw you out on the literary context of Joyda's amazing work. For many readers of Bangla poetry in translation, honestly, even across the world, Tagore remains the great colossus. A number of people also know of Jibanananda Das. And then we are aware that there's a phalanx of poets who followed. Shakti Chattopadhyay, Shankar Ghosh, Joyda, the Hungrealists. But I'd like to draw you out on this generation that came into its own from the late 60s onwards. Where would you place Joyda in the context of that emergent generation?
This is actually a rather vast and I imagine a scholarly question, but I will try and answer it from my point of view as a practitioner and also from my extensive reading around the works of Joyda when I began translating him. It's perhaps important to note that there's this whole idea of the literary tradition that we keep harking back to, and I suspect for every new generation the desire to
remake the tradition, to dismantle what came before and start anew is a very urgent one. I get the feeling that for Joyda, the tradition was larger than the one that came before him, and also not restricted specifically to Bengali poets. So while I do know that, for example, Shankho Ghosh is a very important figure in his growth as a poet, even in his life, I know that Shankho Ghosh is a kind of perhaps even a guru-like figure. But I think the trick for someone like Joyda was what would he do with language that would go forward from the enormous possibilities opened out by Jibananand. And I think there are people who have written very evocatively on this, and I'm just going to take the liberty of sharing a line from an introduction that the young Bangla poet Shubhra Bandyopadhyay wrote uh, as a preface to a book of translations done by my father, as it happens. And he says that Jibanananda Das was probably the prototype described by Pessoa in the book of Disquiet. And I think it's really, where are you coming from? What are your reference points? Joyda to me strikes me, and it's something people have said before, is how he's been able to grab the popular imagination as effectively, vividly, and totally as he has managed to. Alan Seeley, when he was writing the blurb for my selected poems for Harper, he has a line which I think only a non-Bengali could have written, where he says Joy Goswami, in the vernacular, in his use of the vernacular and his range, makes Tagore look merely schoolmasterly. And I love this line because it's ouch, I went, because I was like, yeah, somebody perhaps needed to say that. So Joyda really expanded the range of what Bangla poetry could do. And he didn't stay within, say, specifically the political, the polemical, or the love poetry, all of which he has written. He has written protest poems during Nondigram. He has many, many love poems. His poems have gone into song. They are recited by actors on stage. His work has gone into cinema. But really the kernel of his contribution to Bangla literature, I feel, is an unswavering commitment to pushing the boundaries of language. And he himself says it, to go beyond the reach of the word. I think that's what his enormous contribution to me is, specifically from my point of view as a reader, because as you know, translators are the closest readers.
Absolutely. Now, very glad that you've put all these ideas into play, because all too often people tend to reduce poets to the languages they happen to write in. But as we know, great poets certainly remake, they break and recraft the language that they're given. I'm thinking here, for instance, of the German poet Paul Celan, whose use of German can be cryptic, can be playful, is at all times extremely inventive. So it's no use calling Celan a German poet. I mean, he writes in his own very, very particular language. So I want to take this thought a little further. Somewhere in his writings and his interviews, Joyda has said that he needs a new language in which to bear witness to every new experience. And in the course of your own translations, you've translated works from different phases of his career. Could you tell us a little in terms of how you had to match these shifts in his language in your translations, in what you did with your own language, with English, in the act of translating?
Thank you. Yeah, that absolutely goes to the heart of it, I think, and to the heart of my challenge, self-imposed challenge, because I think, the great joy of translating, if you'll pardon the pun, is simply to be able to meet the challenge from one's own language. And here, when I say own language, I mean the language I write in, which is English, of course. So, Joyda has written about language for poets being a code, for being language as a mystery, and language as a way of veiling the truth of what is actually being said. So I think much of my task as the translator has to, of course, play the detective, play the code breaker, pierce through that seeming barrier. But to do this often in a way that is very artisanal. It's almost like, what can I do with my hands? How can I unmake the syntax that Joyda gives me in Bangla in a way that in English it doesn't sound unnatural? And he has two lines which I want to quote. In one, of course, I'm quoting my own translation, which seems a bit strange, but he writes, "In softness, I'll set out from home. In birdness, I'll set out from language." And I always look at these two lines as a kind of manifesto in a nutshell. Because how do I set out in birdness? If that is about achieving a kind of flight, how is it that I will soar? These are the things that I will then keep in mind when I make the movement from Bangla into English. It will be at many times a difficult crossing, but I will have to do it while maintaining the buoyancy and the ballast of what is there in the raft or the boat. And these water images are there a lot in Joyda's poetry, especially in Shurjo Pora Chai, for example. And I find this idea of ferrying the meanings across, maybe part of my job as an effective translator.
Now, in the more recent work that you're doing, which is the translation of Joyda's prose poems, I know that you've, because we've discussed it, I know that you've spent a lot of time thinking through his use of the ethos and the vocabulary of Hindustani classical music. So, thinking of this bilingual title that we have, translating joy, joy as in delight, but joy also as jaya, victory. What are the moments of victory or the limits that you might reach as a translator when you come up against things in the original with which you might not have necessarily?
So Ranjit, to answer your question about how does one translate areas that are beyond one's own knowledge and experience, and with reference to specifically some of the new prose poems where Joyda talks about Hindustani classical music, the answer is really twofold. One is to, in this case, I'm lucky I can ask the poet himself. So I did ask Joyda for specific terms and also backstories sometimes. Because there's a wordplay, for example, Suman Kalyanpur, what do I do with that? What is a mode as opposed to, just notes? I can't use these words loosely.
Right.
The other, and this has happened also because, you and I both exist in a community of translators. And so I could also turn to someone like you because you have a deep understanding and knowledge of classical music. I'm thinking of the poem, Joyda's poem, Sing for the Cognoscenti of Song,
Right.
where you've really been very much my advisor on that, on whether I've got the terms right. And what does one do with those terms? It makes no sense to translate them into, say, the Western classical terms, so you retain them. So I think it's really a matter of creating a repository of references and trusting one's instinct in a way that is, as you've mentioned this before, in a way that is custodial perhaps, where you preserve, you take care, but you also know that you are trusted enough to make leaps into the unknown occasionally.
Right.
Thus, I suppose it's a bit of all that, a bit of a balancing act, really.
Also, not only are we part of a community of translators together, but many of us are poets who are translators, which I think is quite a specific experience and practice.
Yes.
So I know that I've learned a great deal from the poets I've translated, even if they lived centuries ago. And I know how that's inflected and transformed my own practice. So I want to draw you out on that. I'm very interested in hearing from you how this long-term travel with Joyda and his work has come into your own poetry. How has it made the transition across languages and from one sensibility to another?
I think, thank you for that layered question. I think it's really about where are the borders between the different things that we do. So, for example, the word custodian is so related to curator, which is what you do as well. And perhaps staying with the work of one poet consistently over so many years, I began translating Joyda in 2005, is an act of commitment, of course, but I think it also has to do with the way in which it expands one's own universe in not just a writerly way. So I'm thinking of the ways in which translating Joyda has made me read up around Joyda's work.
Right.
His little books of essays on his own influences, some of which I had to translate in bits to throw a certain light on a particular text or a particular period that I needed to know more about. So I think also reading the world's literatures, the world's poets, you've mentioned this before, in translation, reading translations from different moments in time, so that you realize, okay, even a translation can travel through various periods of, what is the, I hate to use the word methodology, but perhaps there are certain things that earlier generations might have privileged. For example, exactitude, especially because it's poetry. Should I get the metrical right? Or should I keep the meaning? Those things actually happen intuitively to some level, don't you think? Because we are already poets in
Absolutely.
in a parallel practice. And I think translating Joyda made me aware of the atomic structure of words in a way that perhaps I wasn't. I mean, I come back to that because it's true. He breaks it down. I had to write a poem called Translations while translating Joyda in the beginning. It's there in the first book. And where I said, there are no laws in this land of doubles. I must make my own. Very much the idea of the brave pioneer crossing the frontier. Darkness, my limits are water. There's a sense of bravery of going into the unknown. I like that. But in my own work, I think attention, care, depth, silence, fearlessness. And I like the three figures that Joyda gives us.
Mm-hmm.
He equates the poet, the revolutionary, and the scientist.
Right.
And I love that. So I feel these are the things, possibly these are not even things I'm aware of until I'm asked to think about them. But somewhere these are the impulses that are manifesting them as I move along. I find a kinship in the way both of us, Joyda and I, are interested in space, in travel, in space-time continuums. Those things. Possibly that's why I was drawn to Surjapura Chai in the first place. And then, of course, these, what is the alien? What is the language that the alien would speak? Space Gulliver is all about that,
That's
right?
true.
How do we have landings in language which are otherwise estranged from normative reality? Or in Joyda's work, something could be very normal, like there could be a roll shop in Kolkata.
Right.
Alas, no roll shops right now.
True.
But a roll shop, and you think, oh, this is very pedestrian, it's quotidian. But then you realize, no. Something is happening, something extraterrestrial is happening. And these are the joys for which I think people read him, and certainly the reason I translate him. And when the convergences happen, it's just a sense of being in very good company.
That's fantastic. Uh, Also, from everything you just said, I'm so strongly reminded of the fact that Joyda's cosmopolitanism actually emerges in the first place from a so-called small town milieu. And I've always been fascinated by the way in which, whilst we in the metropolitan centers think this is natural to us, there's also an incredible will to globality, as Okwi and Rezor used to say, among people who are cut away from the big city, who are in cantonments, railway junction towns, hill stations, the so-called mufazzal. So I'm thinking back to this teenager, adolescent in Ranaghat, who reaches out for the world. So I'd love to hear more from you about what you heard from Joyda, about where he grew up and what being out in the world meant to him.
It's absolutely so true, because in all the conversations and also in my reading, it's the image of this young man in Ranaghat at the railway station, sitting on a bench. He has no train to catch just yet. He will eventually catch that train and go to Calcutta.
Right.
But at the moment, he is content to sit on that railway station. There's a beautiful little essay on Bonolata Sen, which connects us right back to Jivanananda Das, and where he talks about going into his favorite bookshop, which is just off the railway station. And he goes there. I've mentioned it in my introduction to the selected poems. He first hears Bonolata Sen in a function at his mother's school. His mother was a teacher, a headmistress, and some local dignitary came and instead of making a boring old speech, recited Bonolata Sen from memory, as many Bengalis do. And Joyda was transfixed. So he went into this bookshop in Ranaghat and said, "Do you have this book?" And before he could say the whole name or the title or anything, the knowledgeable bookshop owner gave him this slender volume. And he sat right there and he read it. And he said that moment of reading Bonolata Sen changed his life. It changed his life as a young man. It changed his life as a poet. And I mention it in my introduction only because that's the kind of feeling I had when I encountered Surjo Porachai. I really felt this, my life had changed, and this episode is written in a letter that he published as a book to a young friend. And
Right.
It's called Concerning a Single Poem. And you're so right. This is happening in Ranaghat. He is sitting at the station and reading Rilke's translations
There you are.
in Bangla. So the world, he's reading Baudelaire. And so the world is coming to him. He is certainly not isolated in a little bubble.
No.
And I think that globality, that enormous aptitude and appetite for the world's literature pouring in through the little library or the little bookshop near the railway station is a very powerful image. And we tend to, as you rightly point out, forget that. We think the city is where all the action is. Far from it.
Also, this leads me to think of how too often there's an Anglophone ascendancy. I mean, we are Anglophone poets, but I know that for both of us, being interlingual, being between and among languages is a crucial and inspiring experience. So I just thought we could maybe end by talking about why, as I believe, translation should be a core discipline for poets in any language. And for instance, when you think back to the history of English, from roughly the 15th to the early 20th century, most poets went through a classical education. They grew up as schoolboys, translating from the Latin and Greek. The Prakrit poets here were at home in Sanskrit. The Urdu poets were at home in Farsi. Translation has always been a part of our equipment. So what is it that you think has gone wrong today? Why are poets content with being monolingual? Why are they trapped in what I see as a defensive monolingualism?
Lovely question. defensive monolingualism. I think it's one possible answer could be fear, because translation does come with an enormous baggage. And I think my own experience has simply been to jump into the deep end by doing it, and
Right.
doing it for love and joy rather than something, more, perhaps more academic, which is not to diss the academic discipline of doing it as curriculum, for example. I'm deeply tempted to establish some sort of school of translation
True.
where, practitioners sit together. We help the younger ones out to find their own resources. I think to move across languages through translation makes us, we have to sharpen our own writerly skills to an extraordinary limit. It becomes a way of testing oneself to the utmost. It's a way of enriching, broadening, layering, texturing, confounding. Um, this idea of the sealed room within which I will be writing, hearing only one kind of sound,
Right.
can only damage one's ability to pick up the essential textures, the cadences, the songs that will animate our own creative languages from something that we've just inherited to something that we are recreating in our own work. People say transcreate and all. I don't think that's what I'm getting at. I really mean a way of enriching one's own repository of language skills in such a focused way that it becomes, and in such a continuous way that it becomes intuitive then to think across more languages than one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sampurna. It's really been a pleasure to talk with you about the work of Joy Goswami, who is truly one of our most extraordinary contemporary poets, and also for this marvelous discussion about language translation and so many of these questions that will always be with us as poets and as readers. Thank you.
বাতাস আমার সঙ্গেই বয়ে যাচ্ছে রানাঘাটের নিস্তারিণী মন্দিরের পাশের রাস্তায়। মন্দিরের চূড়ায় ত্রিশূলের পাশ দিয়ে বাতাস আমারই সঙ্গে বেড়াতে চলেছে। বাতাসের হাতে কোনো লাঠি নেই, ঘোড়ার লাঠি নেই নেই। বৃষ্টি আমাকে সঙ্গে নিয়েই পড়ছে তরুণ সংঘের ফুটবল মাঠে। বালকদের গায়ে পড়ছে বৃষ্টি আমার সঙ্গেই। ছেলেরা বল খেলছে কাদা মাঠে, আমি কিক মারছি, ছুটছি, আমার পায়ে কোনো ব্যথা নেই, হাতে কোনো লাঠি নেই। আমি ফ্রি কিক নিতে দৌড়চ্ছি, ফ্রি কিক নিলাম। পৃথিবীটা শো করে উঠে গিয়ে গোলপোস্টের মাথার উপর দিয়ে উড়ছে, 9টা গ্রহ উড়ছে, পা দিয়ে হাত দিয়ে আমি ক্রমাগত তাদের নিয়ে জাগলিং করে যাচ্ছি। দিন হয়ে যাচ্ছে, রাত হচ্ছে, বিলিয়ন ট্রিলিয়ন বছর পার হয়ে যাচ্ছে, খেলা দেখিয়ে যাচ্ছি আমি। আমার বিশ্রাম নেওয়ার দরকার হলেই এই টিনের সুটকেসে আমি ভরে ফেলবো গোটা ব্রহ্মাণ্ডকে। সুটকেস মাথায় দিয়ে ঘুমিয়ে পড়বো। তারপর একদিন ওরা নিজেরাই বাক্স ফেটে ছড়িয়ে পড়বে, দৌড়তে থাকবে, গ্যালাক্সির পর গ্যালাক্সি তৈরি করতে করতে দৌড়বে। ওদের সঙ্গে কণা হয়ে কণা হয়ে কণা হয়ে দৌড়বো আমিও, যদিও কোনো গ্রহে আরেকবার প্রাণ তৈরি করতে পারি।
The breeze is blowing along with me down the road next to the Nistarini temple in Ranaghat. Past the trident on top of the temple, the breeze is roaming around with me. The breeze has no stick in its hands, no crippled stick, none. The rain has fallen along with me in the football field of the youth club. The rain falls on the boys' bodies along with me. The boys are playing in the muddy field and I'm kicking the ball, running. I have no pain in my legs, no stick in my hands. I'm running to take a free kick. I take the free kick. The planet rises with a whoosh and flies above the goalposts. The 9 planets are flying. I'm juggling them with my hands, my feet. It's day, it's night. A billion trillion years are passing. I'm continuing to show my moves. When I need to rest, I will fill the entire universe into this tin suitcase and fall asleep with the suitcase on my head. Then one day it will explode on its own and they will scatter, they will run, creating galaxy upon galaxy, and I will run. I will run along with them in the form of a particle. Perhaps on some other planet, I will create life once more.
Thank you for that wonderful session, Shaunpurna Chatterjee and Ranjit Hoskote. And thank you so much, Joy Goswami, for that delightful reading. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. If you've enjoyed the session, please do share it with your friends and on your social media pages. And do send us your feedback. We value it a lot. And we look forward to seeing all of you in the next session. Thank you.
Words are bridges.
शब्द सेतु हैं।
अल्फाज दिलों को और इंसानियत को जोड़ने का एक अजीम और तरीन पुल है।
വാക്കുകൾ പാലങ്ങളാണ്, ശബ്ദി പുൾ ഹെ. ഗുംസിര ദലോ
शब्दोज सेतु छे।
लफ्ज च सरी कदलदारान
वहीनतन
आखर हमार मेल सन, आखर हमार जोड़।
তিন কিপিনপুৰ জিংকিং
শব্দই সমন্বয়ৰ হেতু।
কথাই হলো সেতু।
কথাই রক yakaraise Utra Sankoasa
Tuhi inkung kainasiam tu ani.
வார்த்தைகள் பாலங்கள் போன்றவை.
Ajrahana Apati Disale
साप्ताहिक माध्यम
Grauthaining yaukrai.
नंगड़ तकिल सेतुए कटोना
शब्द सेतु होनी।
शब्दां दी सांझ